The year I loved Evan the most was the year I died. Evan locked me in the basement for a whole day and night to make Angela happy. Then there was a short circuit, a fire broke out, and I suffocated in there. The last thing I saw before dying was a teenager with a chair, desperately breaking the lock and rushing to my side. His clothes were burning, but he didn't care. Who was he? I can't remember. I just know I died in his arms. After I died, my soul stuck by the teenager's side. The fire blazed, yet he held me tight, unmoving. I couldn't help but shove at him, shouting, "Run! Are you just gonna wait here to die?" But I knew he couldn't hear a ghost. It wasn't until the fire truck roared in and a bunch of firefighters carried him out that I finally left that wretched basement. Outside, it was sunny, a beautiful day. I saw Evan pacing nervously outside the villa, asking everyone, did they get the girl in the basement out? Oh, he didn't know I was dead yet. You see, I've liked this boy for 10 years. And even as the fire consumed me, he didn't dare come in to save me. My body was still being held by that teenager. He walked straight to a black car, opened the door, and gently placed me in the passenger seat. He even thoughtfully buckled my corpse in with a seatbelt. Then the car roared to life and sped out of the neighborhood. The teenager, fleeing with a dead girl, like something out of a movie. We left the city. The scenery turned to fields, villages, and then a beach. We came to the sea, an untouched, deserted beach. Finally, the car stopped. He carried me out, walked slowly into the water, and sank beneath the waves with me. He said, "Nancy, I'm Gary. Do you remember me?" Was he confessing? Confess. Confess. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in a high school classroom, surrounded by classmates aged 17 or 18. A girl nudged me and asked, "Nancy, is that a love letter you're holding?" The letter in my hand was crumpled, the cover neatly addressed, "To Evan." I'd gone back to that day in high school when I planned to confess to Evan. It was Friday afternoon, almost time for school to end. In 5 minutes, Evan would walk into the classroom. I was supposed to hand him that letter in front of everyone. But what did he say back then? "Oh," he said, "sorry, I'm not interested in dating right now." No, that's not right. I shook my head. You all had it wrong. Just then, Evan walked in. Someone shouted, "Evan, Nancy needs to talk to you." A nosy tone. I tore the letter in half, calmly saying, "No, nothing's up. They're just joking." And I threw the shredded paper in the trash. Evan looked at me for a while. He said nothing, just returned to his seat. Disappointed, the nosy crowd sighed. I thought there'd be some drama. Guess not. Flipping through my book at my desk, I could feel the end of school approaching. Everyone was packing up in high spirits. But I had this nagging feeling that something else was important. Maybe it wasn't a big deal to me back then, so it got buried in my memories. Until the homeroom teacher walked in, jolting me back to reality. "It's him." The students saw the teacher and grumbled quietly about the time. Our school was a private, elite institution. Most students came from wealthy families, which made discipline hard for him. The teacher called towards the door, "Come on in." Gary walked in from the hallway. Oh, I remembered. He was a transfer student who joined our school in senior year from another city. He always wore faded uniforms and carried a worn-out backpack, contrasting with the class's luxury style. Maybe that's why he rarely spoke to anyone, often left isolated. He'd always sit in the back, quietly doing practice problems. But he was top-notch in academics, always among the top 3, especially in science subjects. Practically every time, he scored full marks. Gary bowed slightly and introduced himself. "I'm Gary, from the nearby city." The teacher nodded. Pointing to a seat at the back, he said, "Take that spot." Gary, with his backpack, walked steadily through the classroom and sat behind me. He slowly took out his books, neatly arranging them on his desk. A bit uneasy, a bit clueless. But it was okay. At 17, there was still time, a chance to start over. The classroom buzzed again after the teacher left. Everyone turned around, curiously eyeing Gary. A troublemaking classmate, Ben, walked over and asked, "City? You from the coal city nearby? My family's got business there. Who's your dad? Maybe our parents know each other." Gary pinched his fingers, a bit flustered. He mumbled, "My dad's not in business, He's not a coal miner, is he?" Ben cut in, laughing. "A lot of people here learn how to suck up to the rich and disdain the poor from a young age. Some think it's interesting here, so they come over to watch." That made Ben even more smug. He picked up Gary's book and sniffed it. "It really does smell like coal." The sound of mocking laughter was just disgusting. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and splashed water from my cup over his head. "Are you a bloodhound or something, Ben?" Ben, soaked now, glared at me, embarrassed and furious. He rolled up his sleeves and stared me down. "Nancy, are you looking to get hurt?" "Sorry, but I've already been there." Maybe high school Nancy was shy and reserved, but 28-year-old Nancy isn't. I smiled. "Damn right, I am." But it didn't escalate into a fight because Evan walked over. He frowned at me. "What's up with you today?" "Head home." Evan's the class president. His family's the most powerful in all of New York, so Ben wasn't going to mess with him. Seeing him just reminded me of the blazing fire. Being suffocated by smoke was just awful. I said, "Let's not walk home together anymore, okay? I need to stay late to study for college entrance exams." Evan snorted. He looked at me oddly. "Nancy, what's gotten into you?" "I got sick of seeing you, that's what." I pointed to the classroom door. "Could you not disturb my studies, President? Angela's waiting for you at the door." Evan, Angela, and I were childhood friends. Our parents were in business together, and our families often got together socially. I used to think Evan was really good to me. He'd even call me his little sister. But he only ever saw me as that, a sister. The one he's always liked is Angela. Angela waved at us from the door. "Evan, what are you saying to Nancy? Aren't you guys leaving?" Evan looked at me again and tapped my desk with his finger. "If you're having trouble with physics, I can tutor you over the weekend." Then he grabbed his backpack and headed toward Angela. Soon it was just me and Gary left in the room. The classroom clock ticked away. Behind me, Gary's pen scratched across the rough paper. I've always seen him as the serious, studious type. But Gary, in your eyes, who am I? I turned around, leaning on the back of the chair to study him. His eyebrows and the corners of his mouth gradually blended with the man who held me in the fire. He said, "Nancy, I'm Gary. Do you remember me?" I guess I was staring too intently, and Gary noticed. He looked up, puzzling at me, rubbing his chin, and cautiously asked, "Is there something on my face?" I shook my head quickly. No. Awkward. To break the tension, I grabbed a physics exercise booklet from the desk and flipped it open in front of Gary. "Can you help me with this problem?" Seeing the question, Gary instantly lightened up. He glanced at it and said, "This problem's actually not that hard. I can't even do easy problems. Physics has always dragged me down on exams." He quickly wrote out a couple of formulas on paper, just like this, and this, then this. Then he asked, "Understand?" I looked puzzled. I gave a long drawn-out "oh." He chuckled, "Maybe I should help you with the basics." I guess Gary could tell my actual level from my confused look. He closed the workbook, pulled out the textbook, turned to the first page, and said softly, "Let's start from chapter 1. I think Gary's tutoring is far better than my dry-as-dust high school physics teacher. Way better than Evan, too. Yeah, in my previous life, I'd always tail Evan with all kinds of wrong questions. "Evan, can you help me with the kinetic energy theorem?" "Evan, why can't I ever get the last math question right?" "Evan, it's so frustrating." No wonder he always coolly said, "Are you stupid, Nancy?" You can't figure anything out. It wasn't until security came and knocked on the door, standing there impatiently. What are you two still doing here this late? Not going home? Do I need to call your parents or what? Gary and I finally realized it was close to 8 and the school was about to lock up. We hurried to pack up and apologized as we dashed out. When we reached the school gate, a car beeped, pulling up beside me. The driver rolled down the window and called out, "Nancy." "It's our family driver, Mark. He was here to pick me up since I hadn't come home yet." "Get in, your mom's waiting for dinner." Mark shot me a look, not too happy. I quickly opened the door but turned back to Gary. "Gary, it's late. Want a ride?" "No, thanks. I live far, toward the west side. It's out of your way." He looked awkward again, with a shy smile. "There are still buses around this time, really convenient." Gary waved and ran toward the bus stop. Going west takes over an hour by bus. I've been there once. It's barely developed, with old buildings and trash scattered. I called out, "Gary." He paused and turned back. "Do you know my name?" I asked. Under the streetlight, his face turned slightly red. I said, "It's Nancy, remember that." Though I've time traveled, my high school subjects didn't travel with me. That's truly tragic. Plus, I was just an average student, so I have to spend weekends going over high school books at my desk. Almost every line was filled with notes. I'm not smart, but I've always tried hard. Just as I was racking my brain with these study points, my phone buzzed, startling me. It was Angela. She sent me a photo. Library study room, a few books, and 2 cups of milk tea on the table. She had an exasperated emoji. "Nancy, Evan dragged me to study over the weekend. I'm not even a regular student, it's killing me. You coming?" Angela is a dance student. Evan's really something. Who invites someone to the library for a date? I just replied with 2 words, "Not coming." She didn't respond after that. I went back to my books. After a while, my brain felt like mush. I really missed that afternoon when Gary explained stuff to me. It was so clear. I opened my phone, downloaded the updated contact list from the class group files, found Gary's number, and called him. He picked up quickly. "Is this Gary?" I asked. "Nancy?" He hesitated. I laughed. "I was doing some problems and thought of you. Hope I'm not interrupting." We talked about a lot. We chatted about which teachers were the strictest, which ones were a bit biased, and some campus legends and gossip that have been around forever, but Gary had never heard of. He kept agreeing with me, occasionally joining me in expressing exaggerated disbelief. He really helped fulfill my need to share stories. This guy is seriously sweet. But why can't I remember where I first crossed paths with him? After chatting for a while, we finally hung up. I casually opened my social media and scrolled through. Found that Evan surprisingly posted something. Reviewed some physics topics today, pretty productive. There was a picture of the corner of a physics workbook. A bunch of likes and loads of comments. "Class president, help me out, physics is killing me." Wow, is the class genius actually getting serious? "Evan, if you keep getting better, you'll score 200 points. Please, stop studying." Before Gary joined our class, Evan always had the top grades, beating second place by quite a margin. Until Gary came along and his top spot started to shake. The two of them went back and forth for first and second place in tests. Other students expected an intense rivalry between the top 2 students. But honestly, I don't remember them having more than 10 conversations. They were hardly close. I felt a bit guilty bothering Gary for so long. That evening, I rummaged through the kitchen for ingredients and baked a box of cookies to give Gary as a gift. I used to make these little treats often. And I'd even give my cookies and cakes to Evan to taste. But once, in the past life, when I visited his office, I saw the cookies I gave him. Only one was eaten, the rest were untouched, and some were moldy. That's when I realized he didn't actually like the stuff I gave him. My mom heard the noise and came down to the kitchen. Wasting food again? She frowned. Evan doesn't like those, why not make something else? Who said it's for Evan? It's for a new friend. I straightened up, loud and proud. That scored some surprise. Mom looked at me curiously, clicking her tongue at the change. The next day during break, I turned around and placed the cookies on Gary's desk. He opened the box cautiously, eyes lighting up instantly. Surprise, happiness, and a bit of confusion. "Nancy, you're the first to make me cookies," he said. Getting recognition feels great. But Evan, holding a stack of papers, came out of the teacher's office. He just happened to pass by and suddenly stopped, glancing at us, and then randomly asked, "Did you make those cookies?" Huh? He startled both Gary and me with his sneakiness. Evan stared at the cookies for a while, then weirdly said, "Nancy, you said you'd never give your homemade stuff to just anyone." I scratched my head. Back when I was pursuing Evan in high school, I seemed to have said something like that. "Evan, no one but you can taste my precious homemade desserts." So sappy, why'd he have to call me out? I looked down, feeling guilty, avoiding him. Seeing I wasn't speaking, Evan went on to chat with Gary. "Heard you're pretty good at physics?" He placed the papers on the desk and casually picked a topic. Gary shook his head, humbly replying, "Nah, just average." No need to be modest. 98 is high. Evan picked a paper from the stack and handed it to Gary. "It's from your transfer test, right? I just grabbed it while collecting the previous quiz papers for you." I leaned over to check it out. Everything was perfect except for the last big problem. Evan pointed at the missed part. "That's from a physics competition, give it another shot." In the past life, Evan always had some physics competition coaching outside school, winning awards and earning extra points for college admissions. Seeing me listening intently, he suddenly flicked my forehead. "Nancy, do you even get it?" I glared at him. "Stop underestimating me, I can improve too." He laughed, surprisingly gently. "Why didn't you come to the library over the weekend? Didn't I say I'd help you with your questions?" It's the first time I've heard him say this. But I shook my head. "I can't." "Ask Gary, he's right behind me." Evan froze a bit. He glanced at me, then at Gary, didn't say a word, and walked off with his papers in a huff. A couple of steps away, he turned around and coolly said, "Nancy, you better come to Angela's celebration party next Saturday." Angela's celebration, the turning point that changed everything. Angela's an art student, so her coursework requirements aren't too high. As long as she passes her art exams, she's pretty much set. In the last lifetime, she really outdid herself. A couple of great dance schools extended offers to her. It was a big deal. Angela's dad threw a fancy dinner at a 5-star hotel and even gave her 2 days off to celebrate with friends. The catch? No overnight stays. Can't blame her dad for that. She hung out a lot, with friends from all walks of life. Angela booked a luxury suite at a KTV and I went. There were classmates from our school and friends from her art classes. It was loud and wild. Evan and Angela were in the center, people egging them to sing a duet. Nearing midnight, my mom video called me. Angela saw the screen light up. She said, "My mom said she went shopping with your mom today and is probably still at your house playing mahjong. My phone's off, don't pick up. She'll drag me back for sure." Being the goody two-shoes I am, I answered. Sure enough, it was both my mom and Angela's mom on the call. Angela's mom shouted, "It's so noisy there. Angela, do you know what time it is? Are you coming home or not? Tell me where you are and I'll send over the driver." Angela was exasperated. "Mom, enough. I finished my exams, let me have just one night out. I'm not gonna lose an arm or leg." Both were stubborn. After a long back and forth, Angela's mom declared. If you don't come home tonight, forget next month's allowance. Angela was quite the little rich girl at school, getting 50 grand a month as allowance. That shut her up real quick. She cursed under her breath and announced her night of fun was over. Later, Evan walked us downstairs and waited with us in the lobby for Mark to pick us up. Angela didn't say a word to Evan then. She was mad. When she was on the call with her mom, she desperately signaled Evan for help, hoping he'd chime in with something like, "Don't worry, ma'am, I'll look after Angela tonight." Angela's mom adored Evan and even thought about getting them together. If he said something, maybe Angela's mom would have agreed. But he just stood there cold and indifferent. So Angela eventually had to leave with me. She blamed both of us. "You two are the worst, such buzzkills." She stomped her feet, teeth clenched. On the way back, there was a car accident. The police determined it was Mark's drunk driving that caused it. Angela and I were in the hospital for half a month. Her injuries were worse. Ligament damage in her leg meant no dancing for a few years. Her mom cried her eyes out at the hospital, telling Mark he would pay dearly. Mark faced legal consequences and paid damages, but what use was money to Angela's wealthy family? It was a turning point. If not for the accident, Angela would have stayed in the country, and the three of us would have continued hanging out like in high school. Years later, Evan might have ended up with Angela. I'd probably be upset, but after a good cry, I would have blessed them and moved on with my own life. But the crash changed it all. Angela quit dance school and went abroad for art school. Evan and I ended up going to college in the same city and we'd meet sometimes. He knew I had a crush on him, but he'd often say, "Nancy, do you really think you deserve this after what happened to Angela?" We were both gripped by guilt. He'd fly across China to get Angela those Macau almond cookies. And he'd stay glued to the alarm to score Justin Bieber tickets for her concert needs. He always sent her gifts for every holiday and anniversary. Years later, Angela came back to China. Evan pulled our old friends together for a welcome back party. Late into the night, Angela, after finishing a song, turned to me with the mic in hand. "Nancy, even after all these years of graduating, does your mom still care if you're home by night?" The air turned silent, dead quiet. I knew she never really forgave me. Evan tried to intervene, "Angela," but she snapped, "Evan, don't interrupt. Isn't Nancy known as the goody girl? Guess you wouldn't fit in with us anyway. Why not lock yourself in a room and be happy alone?" She clung to Evan's arm, her voice sickly sweet. Didn't have a comeback for that. Wanted to argue, but somehow felt like I owed her. Evan sighed. He glanced at me and took out his keys, then with Angela, locked me in the basement. Angela tapped on the basement door and cheekily called, "Nancy, I'll let you out after the party." I had no idea why her party lasted so long. All I knew was that the fire started. This life's tragedy is one I refuse to repeat now. I'm determined to change it. Stopping Angela's celebration is nearly impossible. So I chose not to go myself. If I don't go, Mark won't be driving us. Saturday night, Evan called, "When are you coming over?" It was loud, I barely heard him. "I'm not coming, busy with work," I said. "Suit yourself." Evan replied coldly after a brief silence. I hung up, feeling like my reputation as a hard-working nerd was officially spreading. Around midnight, I went downstairs to check things out again. Mark was in the kitchen, video chatting with an old army buddy, having drinks and food. He saw me and waved, "Nancy, why aren't you asleep yet?" I opened my mouth, hesitating to speak. Finally, I said, "Mark, you're getting older. Maybe drink a little less." In the living room, a few women were having a blast playing mahjong. Angela's mom had just won a round, in great spirits. She checked the time and suddenly remembered, "Oh no, Angela went out tonight. I better call her and see if she's home." But her phone was off. She tried again, still no luck. Her friend next to her teased, "Come on, it's your turn to be the dealer. Don't try to run now." Angela's mom couldn't keep making calls. She shuffled the tiles, laughing, "You think I'm gonna skip out?" I lay in bed, watching the clock tick by. Everything outside seemed so calm. Just an ordinary night. I slowly drifted into sleep. The next day, my mom woke me up. "Nancy, come down for breakfast." It was only 8 o'clock. Half awake, I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through my social media. A classmate posted something. "Prom king and queen, do they match or what?" It was a picture of Evan and Angela. Both were dozing on a sofa, with Angela's head gently resting on Evan's shoulder. Guess the party went late and everyone got exhausted. Someone caught the whiff of gossip, snapped a pic of them, and posted it online. There were lots of teasing comments. I knew those two were a thing. Our school's hottest pair. Seeing the photo snapped me wide awake. I sat straight up in bed. No car crash, Angela never left the party early, everything was just fine. Excited, I liked the post. Then I commented, "This is great news." But soon after, when I refreshed, the post was gone. And then Evan called me. "Nancy," he said, a bit oddly. "Last night got crazy. I took a nap in the middle and didn't join in later." "Oh," I replied. Why was he telling me this? He chuckled, "Thought you might have gone." "If I knew you weren't, I wouldn't have either." I awkwardly fiddled with my nose, unsure of what to say. We both stayed silent for a moment. I said, "If there's nothing else, I'm gonna have breakfast." He just said, "See you at school tomorrow." Even though the photo vanished, rumors spread fast. Especially given how many from Angela's party were at school. Come Monday, I could feel the buzz of gossip everywhere. But I wasn't part of it. I was more focused on test results coming out soon. This was Gary's first significant test since transferring here. The homeroom teacher announced scores, teasing us with suspense. "We have a dark horse in the class, competition makes us better, huh?" Then he said, "Gary, you're first in the grade." The class erupted with chatter. This was the first time Evan, our usual top scorer, had been dethroned. Gary? That transfer student Gary? But he never talks to us. With college entrance exams coming, another genius appears. Although I knew Gary's skills, I couldn't help but get excited. I turned around, playfully messing up Gary's hair. "Gary. You're incredible." His hair was a mess, but he just smiled gently. My desk mate, a bit annoyed, elbowed me. "Nancy, keep it down." She gave me a look, nodding toward the class leader's glum face. Following her gaze, I saw Evan sitting by the wall. He watched Gary and me, lips tight, looking icy, like a statue about to freeze over. A chill ran down my spine. I realized I was being insensitive. Evan was top for almost 3 years, suddenly getting second would have stung. And there I was, adding salt to a wound. I coughed awkwardly, trying to tone it down. Finally, Evan's icy gaze drifted away. I let out a sigh of relief. Thanks to Gary's tutoring, my grades improved too. So now every Friday after school, I'd study 2 more hours with him. But surprisingly, Evan started sticking around too. When the bell rang, Angela came to our class door. "Evan, time to go home," she called out, like usual. Evan didn't leave or pack his bag. He told her, "You head home, I'll stay here and study a bit longer." Everyone still in the room turned their heads. "Class Prez, you're already in college, why so serious?" Evan had earned lowered scores into his dream college due to winning an Olympiad. Even if he bombed, he'd still be fine. Evan didn't pay them mind. When the class emptied, he sat near my desk with his books. I said, puzzled, "Huh?" Evan explained matter-of-factually, "Your seat's close to Gary, perfect for us discussing problems." I was a bit taken aback. "Should I move to make room for you two geniuses?" Before I could speak, Evan pulled a question out and started talking with Gary. Gary, got any shortcuts for this problem? I feel I'm overthinking it. I glanced over, it was a question I had messed up on my test. So I decided not to make Evan leave and just kept quiet, listening to these two geniuses debate academic stuff. I felt like a little fish benefiting from their knowledge. By the end of the study session, my brain felt like it was about to transcend. Evan and Gary often came up with different approaches to solving problems, and their discussions sparked new ideas. Around 8 p.m., Evan tapped me on the head with his book, "Nancy, time to go home." That snapped me out of my daze. Yeah, I'm leaving. Once I talked to my mom about staying at school a bit after classes on Fridays, she started having Mark pick me up a couple of hours later. Gary, on the other hand, insisted on taking the bus and never let me give him a ride. And now, Evan's joining in too. Evan, the rich kid, didn't have a car coming for him either. He rubbed his nose, shamelessly asked, "Have Mark take me home, okay? Didn't our families take turns picking us three up after school before?" I rolled my eyes. "Class president, can't you be like Gary and take the bus? Do your part for the environment." Evan wasn't impressed by my logic. "What if I call your mom and tell her you left me at school to fend for myself?" I was absolutely floored. We both sat in the back. Mark quietly drove us. For a moment, I felt like I had nothing to say to Evan. The cityscape moved past the car window. Suddenly, Evan asked, "Nancy, the college entrance exam is just months away. Have you thought about where you want to go?" That got me thinking. It's time to make some decisions. I want to head south, see the ocean. But last time, because Evan chose a northern university, I followed him there. It's not that the city was bad, just not a fit for me. Seeing my silence, Evan softly added, "When you decide, tell me. I want to go to the same city as you." He took a deep breath, seemingly making a decision, looked at me. "I want us to be in the same city." I was puzzled. "You already decided on your university, didn't you?" I asked. "A top-tier school that accepts him with lower grades. Plus, it's full of connections, many of Evan's family and friends graduated from there. No reason for him to change plans now." He shook his head, not really answering me, just repeating, "Nancy, let's be in the same city later." I wasn't interested in being in the same city as Evan. At night, wrapped in my blanket, I texted Gary. "Hey Gary, where are you planning to go for college?" I realized the question seemed pointless. With Gary's grades, he could go anywhere. Gary replied quickly. "Haven't decided yet, how about you?" "I want to go somewhere warm, by the sea," I typed, daydreaming. "Same here," Gary replied. This guy, he's obviously just copying me. In my past life, I put effort into my studies to go wherever Evan went. This time, I want to strive for myself. As we moved into the final semester of senior year, the atmosphere in the class got more serious. The countdown to the college entrance exam was on everyone's mind. Even in our private high school, we couldn't escape it. The principal arranged a motivation assembly, inviting the top students to share their study and exam tips. Unsurprisingly, both Evan and Gary were chosen to speak. I remembered from before that the assembly was super boring. I had managed to stay awake until Evan's speech, but after that, I snuck out and went for a walk. I didn't remember Gary's speech at all. Maybe it came later and I missed it. Thinking about it now, it's a little regretful. Luckily, I have another chance. This time I paid full attention, waiting for Gary to speak. Yet, even after Evan finished, and most of the others went up, Gary never appeared. One of the student council organizers walked by, and I caught his arm, asking, "Hey, what about Gary from our class? Why hasn't he gone up?" "I haven't seen him either," he replied, frowning. "I've called him, but he doesn't pick up. It messed up our schedule." "What happened?" That's when I realized something was wrong. I jumped up and ran out of the auditorium. Where could he be? I pulled out my phone to call Gary. Just like the student council said, there was no answer, despite several attempts. The school was so big, I felt like a headless chicken running around among the buildings, while continuously dialing Gary's number. I reassured myself, he's not a kid, he'd be fine. Suddenly, I remembered. In my previous life, after listening to Evan's speech, I snuck out for a walk and heard strange noises near the gym. I was curious and went to the window, seeing some classmates surrounding a guy, hitting and kicking him, yelling nasty things. I didn't know why, but I was overwhelmed with a sense of justice. I barged in, pulling the guy away. If you bully him again, I'll tell the teacher. I even left with such exaggerated bravado. Now, remembering that moment, I realized it was Gary. I sprinted, heading straight to the gym and pushed the door open. The scene was just like before, Gary surrounded in the middle, with some classmates, including Ben. Isn't your family in the coal mining business? So what if you're good at studying? You think you're gonna give a speech on stage? Over my dead body. I can't stand know-it-all students. What skills do you have? After spending more time with Gary, I realized his environment at school was much tougher than I thought. Our high school is really into cliques. Gary, being soft-spoken, transferring mid-year, and from a poor family, didn't fit into any group despite being a top student. He was often isolated. Even bullied. In this world, at least he has me as a friend. I can't imagine how lonely he must have been in his past life. Maybe it's his tough situation that makes him so sensitive to kindness. Perhaps all I did was help him escape from Ben's gang, and he remembers it. I'm not afraid of Ben and his rich kid crew. They caught me and blocked my way. Nancy, what are you doing, playing the hero? This wasn't like how things usually went. I might have shown up at the wrong time, too. The assembly ended, and students were walking this way. Some noticed the commotion and peeked in. I didn't remember things being this dramatic. Ben got more excited seeing an audience. Nancy, I've noticed something between you and him. Why don't you just admit you like him? If you do, I'll say sorry. Our school loves gossip. The crowd made a synchronized sound of disbelief. Who's that? That's Nancy from class 4 and our top student. Gary tugged my hand, his face pale. Nancy, he laughed softly, don't worry. With so many of our classmates here, what can he do to me? Even though he said that. I'm not one to back down. I love Gary, so what? I shouted, is it a crime to have a crush? Which school rule says we can't date? Admitting it wasn't that hard. Nobody expected me to say it so boldly. For a moment, everyone was silent. The onlookers didn't even cheer. Ben stammered, breaking the silence, Nancy, you're brave. What's going on? Causing trouble? An unexpected voice shouted from the crowd. You think you'll get away with this before college entrance exams? The crowd made a path. That guy looked familiar. Oh, it's the student council president. Pointing at Ben and his crew, he spoke sternly, you're about to graduate, and you still bully your classmates? Have you read the school rules? You know we strictly prohibit bullying. Stopping bullying is crucial at our school. Though, behind the scenes, exclusion of vulnerable students often happens. But it never reached the school's top brass. This time, Ben got caught as an example. The president pointed at them one by one, you, and you, follow me to the office. Then he turned to someone behind him, Evan, I'm off to talk to the teacher. Are you coming? I realized Evan came with the student council president. Standing in the shadows, I hadn't noticed him. Evan shook his head and suddenly pointed at Gary. Gary should come too, he's involved and can clarify things. The president nodded, gestured grandly, and led them away. Ben shouted, help. I don't want to see the dean. It's not up to you. The president said, patting his head. With the main players leaving, the audience knew it was over and dispersed. I wanted to wait for Gary outside the office. But after taking a few steps, someone grabbed my wrist. Evan looked at me, eyes intense. Nancy, come with me. I noticed then his face was ashen, lips trembling slightly, holding back some strong emotion. What's up? I whispered. He pulled me aside, leaving no room to refuse, and shoved me into a corner. Evan, much taller, was standing so close, creating an overwhelming presence. Nancy, he frowned, struggling to steady his voice, I understand you wanted to help Gary, but you could have called a teacher or me. No need for this approach. Oh, I got it. He thought I confessed my feelings for Gary just to help him out of a tight spot. I laughed. Evan, you're mistaken. I genuinely like Gary. Hearing this, Evan seemed taken aback. He was silent. For a moment, he looked pained, anxious, almost pitiful, pulling out a torn-up letter, handing it to me carefully. Asking, Nancy, you're kidding, right? What did I do wrong? You can't like Gary if you wrote this letter to me. That was my letter to Evan. But I had ripped it up and thrown it away. I had no idea how he got it. I stared at him, puzzled. Evan gave a bittersweet smile, openly admitting, yeah, I picked it out of the trash. At that point, I wasn't sure how I felt about you, worried that it'd hurt my studies. But I never imagined, Nancy, you'd fall for someone else. Seeing that letter, I actually felt relieved. My crush on Evan, well, it's over. And maybe that's a good thing. I snatched the letter from his hand, ripped it into even smaller pieces, and opened up the window behind me. I tossed it outside. The pieces flew away in the wind, completely beyond repair. Evan's face went pale, and he rushed to the window, grabbing the frame with both hands. Half of his body leaned out as he gritted his teeth. Nancy, you. From the moment I threw away that love letter, you should have known I don't like you anymore, Evan. From now on, unless it's something really important, don't bother me. Like you said, we both have college entrance exams to study for, right? The next day, as soon as I walked into the classroom, I felt everyone looking at me. Of course, I wasn't fazed and sat down, opening my book to read. But it was weird. Where was Gary? I nudged my desk mate and asked her, where's Gary? She gave me a teasing glance. You don't know? Because of your scene yesterday, Ben got nabbed as the bullying scapegoat by the school. He's doing a public apology during morning study. Gary's probably involved too, with the teacher. Just as we were talking, the classroom speakers came on. The principal's voice boomed out. There was a serious bullying incident at school, impacting our community negatively. It's necessary for the ringleaders to deliver a sincere apology. Ben and his crew looked like deflated eggplants, all their swagger gone. They mumbled their apologies, and our classmates couldn't hold back their whispering laughs. I couldn't help but laugh too. The principal asked Gary if he accepted their apology, and Gary answered softly, I've never really paid them any mind. They might be loud, but I just don't see them in the same league. So what if they show off? I almost wanted to applaud him beneath my desk. Then, out of nowhere, he brought me up. Nancy, I've always thought the confession thing should be my job. I like you. I was stunned. My desk mate almost spit out her drink, staring wide-eyed at me. Wow, you guys are really flaunting your relationship in front of the whole school. The consequence? Gary and I had to write statements on our behavior. But at least we could stroll around campus hand in hand now. Sure, dating in high school might not be great for studies, but hey, my boyfriend's ranked #1. That's a huge perk. Why not make good use of it? Suddenly, those tricky science problems seemed easier with Gary's help and explanation. The rest of the senior year didn't seem so grueling anymore. Time flew by quickly. Evan? I barely noticed him. He'd stopped staying for study sessions on Fridays. Even if we crossed paths on campus, his eyes would dart down and he'd hurry past. He seemed to be taking my words seriously and stopped bothering me entirely. When the college entrance exam results came out, I was at an internet cafe with Gary, teaching him some game strategies. Our class group chat exploded. Help! The college entrance exam scores are out. Gary and I dropped our game instantly, leaving teammates hanging, and rushed to check our scores with our exam numbers. Mine was way better than usual, a good 30 to 40 points higher. I shouted in excitement and glanced at Gary's screen. It seemed there was a mistake. A big one. His page showed 0 score. Trembling, I whispered, "How's that possible? Did you forget your name or mix up the exam number?" Gary just shook his head. His finger moved to a line at the bottom of the page, reading, "You've ranked in the top 50 statewide. Please visit for more details." I screamed and hugged Gary. A guy gaming next to us took off his headphones and looked at us, puzzled. "How many monsters did you guys kill to get this hyped?" Blushing, I lowered my voice. "Gary, which school are you thinking of?" Gary smiled, ruffling my hair. "We'll decide together." Later, a renowned Southern university offered Gary a full scholarship and the freedom to pick any major. I got into a nearby teacher's college. Everything seemed straightforward, falling into place. Except for Evan. A few days before the application deadline, Evan's dad called me. "Nancy, can you please help talk some sense into Evan, get him to stick with the original plan and apply to Harvard?" Harvard was the target school that had agreed to lower the bar for Evan. I only then found out he hadn't scored as expected, not good enough for the top business programs in the country. But with Harvard's offer, he could still go there as planned. Honestly, I didn't understand why his dad called me. First, if Harvard, the top school in the country, is ready to take him, why hesitate? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And second, me? What can I say as an outsider? But I couldn't really say no to his dad, so after hanging up, I dialed Evan. The call rang for a while before he finally answered. After hesitating, I asked, "Evan, haven't you decided on a school yet?" His voice was weary. "No." For a moment, I felt a burst of frustration. "Are you crazy or what, class president? What are you thinking? If you're not going to Harvard, where are you going? Settling for a regular college? Isn't that a waste?" I wasn't sure if I was being too harsh. Evan stayed silent for a bit. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Nancy, I'm scared you'll forget me if we're too far apart. I want to go to college in the same city." So, that's what he'd been thinking. "But Evan, there's no need. Really, there's no need." In a cold voice, I said, "Evan, if you do this, I'll lose respect for you. Do you want us to not even be friends?" Evan went to Harvard. Angela aced her cultural classes and got into a dance academy in the same northern city. Gary and I got admitted to a university in the south. Everything turned out perfectly. No car accidents, no injuries, and no fires later on. Our families still got along great, celebrating our success with several graduation dinners. The parents even talked about taking us to the airport together for our flights to college. In the airport lounge, Gary and I were on one flight, Evan and Angela on another. One heading south, the other north. We said our goodbyes at the gate. I hooked my arm through Gary's, handing him a backpack. Angela tried to take Evan's hand, but he subtly shifted away, keeping things cool and distant. He looked at me, opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. I waved at them. Goodbye. Maybe it would be a long, long time before we'd meet again. Evan's epilogue. The autopsy report was out. The cause of death was chemical asphyxiation. The deceased inhaled excessive carbon monoxide, smoke, and toxic gas. It was a pretty agonizing process. Enough already, stop talking about that useless stuff. Martin waved his hand impatiently, cutting off the policeman's explanation. The person is dead, it was just an ordinary accident. Just figure out how to close the case. Was it really just an accident? Angela nestled into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad, I was so scared, so scared. Martin, who'd gone from a low-level thug collecting protection money to a powerful business figure, dealing both legally and illegally, didn't care about such a small case, even if the deceased had been his daughter's close friend since childhood. And me? I was even worse. I sat in the police station, not saying a word. In fact, even if Martin hadn't come today, it would be hard for the police to convict me or Angela. There was no surveillance in that villa in the suburbs. So, aside from Angela and me, no one else had seen us lock Nancy in that basement. No punishment for murder, huh, Evan? I looked at my hands, suddenly feeling a sickening dizziness. Like they were stained with blood. Who is this? I pointed at the man in the photo and asked. The two corpses retrieved by the rescue team lay on the beach. Even bloated and unrecognizable from the water, the man's arms were wrapped tightly around Nancy. I felt a surge of unspeakable frustration. Flipping through his notes, the officer replied, Gary, an associate professor at a famous local university. Such a shame, must be a love pact. Love pact? Nonsense. I felt even more annoyed, angrily interrupting that young officer. Then I turned away, leaving the station without looking back. I walked to the parking lot and had just opened my car door when Angela followed me. Evan, she tugged on my sleeve, her eyes still red, can I stay at your place for a few days? I'm scared. I shoved her away. She was just irritating. Angela, why didn't we think about how scared Nancy would be when we locked her in the basement? Angela stood there dazed after I pushed her away. I drove aimlessly through the city at night. Eventually, I arrived at Nancy's childhood home. In recent years, the family's business hadn't been doing well. Nancy's father had passed away unexpectedly while she was in college. Her mother, stricken with stress and grief, relapsed into illness and soon went abroad for treatment. The remaining relatives were no good, took advantage, and grabbed control of the board. They even took Nancy's shares. Back then, to pay for her mother's treatment, she was forced to sell the villa she'd lived in for years. Somehow, I ended up buying it. Now, the villa was looked after by Mark. He had been released from prison, looking much older, with graying hair, nothing like the slightly aggressive person from 10 years ago. Who is it? Evan, what brings you here? Mark opened the door, surprised to see me. I nodded softly, not knowing how to answer him. Mark took my coat, hung it on the wall, and followed me, asking, Nancy didn't come back? I stopped in my tracks. Mark, she's not coming back. This was the first time I had stayed in the villa since buying it. I went up to the second floor, to Nancy's bedroom. During high school, Nancy, Angela, and I were very close. On holidays or vacations, we'd often hang out at each other's houses. Later, Angela went abroad. Nancy and I went to college up north. She didn't come back often. The bedroom looked almost exactly like back in high school. Blue sheets and comforter, curtains with Winnie the Pooh. Shelves lined with books, beyond the thick dictionaries and practice workbooks, mostly mystery novels. Seeing all this, I realized just how little I actually knew about Nancy. I didn't know her favorite color, her favorite cartoon, or the kinds of books she liked. I even knew Angela liked pink. But I never bothered to learn about Nancy. It was as if her being nearby was enough. Whenever I turned around, she was always there. What a despicable and cowardly thought. I sat at Nancy's desk. A small drawer underneath caught my eye and I opened it absent-mindedly. Inside were notebooks and some documents. A high school graduation photo lay tucked in there, and I gently took it out. Nancy and I stood together, right in the middle row. Back then, we looked so young and naive. Nancy squinted under the sunlight, a soft smile on her lips. I moved my fingers to Nancy's face, gently caressing it. Suddenly felt like 17 was the best time of my life. Just then, a breeze blew, and a piece of stationery fell out from the drawer. It was folded in thirds, with "For Evan" written on top. Was it for me? It felt like a chord was struck in my memory. I unfolded the paper. It was a love letter Nancy gave me during her senior year. Evan, you have no idea, but I've liked you for a long time. I know I'm not great at studying, but I'll work hard to go to the same college as you. Next time I ask you a question, can you not be annoyed with me? Do you like me? Reading her words, a wave of sadness hit me. How did I respond back then? I said, Nancy, I don't want to be in a relationship right now. The senior year was so intense, I didn't want distractions. But more than that, I just felt like Nancy would never ever leave me, so I thought I didn't need to cherish her. Thinking about it now, this arrogance, this pride of mine, I pushed Nancy into a place she couldn't escape. I, myself, caused the death of the person who mattered the most to me. Regret and guilt clawed at my heart, suffocating me. I squatted down, overwhelmed by sorrow. The letter was clenched tightly in my hand. Nancy, I'm sorry. I owe you a life. That night, I slept in Nancy's bed. It was strange, she hadn't come back in years, but I felt like a remnant of her was still there. Lately, I had been staying at the family villa. Mark thought it looked like I'd be here for a while, so he wanted to set up the master bedroom for me. But I told him not to bother, I could stay in Nancy's room. He looked at me, shook his head, and said nothing. During the day, I'd drive to work and attend meetings. Around 8 or 9 at night, I'd return to the family villa. Once back, I would often sit on Nancy's bed, reading the books she left behind. Sometimes, I'd see Nancy standing next to me, pointing at a sentence in a book and saying, Evan, do you know who the killer is? I'm not telling you. Then I'd look up, and she'd be gone. I knew it was just an illusion, but I never went to the hospital to see a doctor. If being sick meant I could see Nancy, it wasn't such a bad thing. Martin unexpectedly invited me to a meal at his private club. Angela was there too. He lit a cigar and tossed a real estate cooperation agreement in front of me, laughing. Evan, among the younger generation, I have the highest hopes for you. What do you say? Interested in the land out west? The west side was like a slum, dirty, chaotic, neglected. The government had wanted to buy the land for development but couldn't agree on demolition prices, so the locals refused to leave. The whole thing got put on hold. Now Martin had the development contract, which meant he must have used some crafty methods to get it. He didn't start with a clean slate, so to make those people leave, he probably used all kinds of tricks, bribery, threats, hired thugs. I picked up the agreement, flipping through it casually. Sure, I replied. Martin laughed even louder. People always say good things come in pairs. Our business is booming, so it's time to think about family too. You and Angela grew up together, but you both are too shy. I've got to help bring you two together. Angela hugged her father, playfully hitting his chest. Dad, stop it. What do you mean? You've been into Evan and just too shy to admit it. Martin ruffled Angela's hair and turned to me. Evan, let's pick a date to get both families together and discuss an engagement, all right? I didn't say a word the entire time. In the business world, these family alliances happen all the time. To them, Angela and I growing up together with a good relationship is better than a loveless marriage for appearances. I drove home in a daze. Opening the door, I lay on the bed. In my dazed state, it seemed like Nancy was there again. She sat by the bed, touched my eyebrows, and smiled. Wow, Evan, you're getting married. I must congratulate you. How much should I give as a present? Fearing she might disappear, I quickly grabbed her wrist. No, Nancy, I won't marry her. Really? Nancy looked confused. Isn't Angela your love? Didn't you ignore my life to make her happy? Evan, the fire was so scary, it hurt so much. I shot up from the bed, drenched in cold sweat. Nancy was gone. I rubbed my temples, my headaches felt unbearable. Was it karma, I thought, with a humorless laugh. The media quickly turned the announcement of our joint development of the West Side into front-page news. As for my engagement with Angela, the tabloids buzzed with gossip. The headlines screamed things like business alliance marriage, Evan and Angela an air love story, childhood friends. Seeing those headlines, I almost burst out laughing in the office. This was likely from Martin's PR team. It made me feel sick. Angela often came looking for me at work. I had my assistant tell her I couldn't get away from my projects. Angela threw a fit. I'll call my dad to send you more help so you can have time to date me. Her fuss, strangely enough, worked wonders. Martin sent over his company's top talents, even some longtime confidants, to help. They came with files for the projects, asking what assistance I needed. In there, tax evasion, bribery, forced demolitions, violence, every illegal tactic was laid bare. Martin felt like we were partners, with no need to hide anything. He even started calling me his future son-in-law in person. I laughed it off, replying, "There's plenty we can work with." 2 months later, Evan's group and Angela's family's company held a joint press conference at a downtown business building about the land development. Both Martin and I showed up. According to his plan, after announcing the development plans for the west side, Martin hoped to use the opportunity to also announce my engagement to Angela. Before taking the stage, he gave my shoulder a pat, adjusted his tie, and had a smug smile on his face. Son-in-law, I had someone check the date. Today's perfect for big events. I just stared at him, not saying a word. After the host announced the start of the press conference, everything proceeded as scheduled. Until a tabloid reporter got the sequence wrong, assuming the development project had been covered enough, and raised his hand to ask, "Let me ask, is the engagement real? Could you tell us the date of the engagement party?" Martin got interrupted midway through and his expression wasn't too good. But since it was about a happy matter, he answered patiently, "Yes, the engagement's real. Evan and my daughter Angela have known each other since they were kids, childhood sweethearts, fell in love freely. We'll let you know the date later." I never agreed to any wedding. I took a sip of water and grabbed the mic, speaking clearly. That statement was like a bomb dropped at the press conference, and the reporters went into a frenzy. What? Is this a last-minute change? What's happening? This is big news. Martin was caught off guard and froze in place. I stood up, grabbed the remote, and projected Martin's crime evidence over the past years onto the screen: tax evasion, violent crimes. Can we really be involved with a mafia-like business? Martin shot up quickly and poured his cup of tea over my head. "Evan, are you crazy?" I wiped my face, smiled, and said, "Yeah, I'm crazy. I hope the regulatory agencies in our country crack down hard on such criminal enterprises." Angela was sitting in the audience. A spotlight from God knows which media outlet landed on her. Her face was tear-stained, and she covered it before running out. The next day, the news of Angela's family being linked to crime spread everywhere. How he built up his empire, how he got to where he is. Soon the police came, taking Martin away. In the pics, he was handcuffed, with a resentful and unwilling look. It's like when a wall collapses, everyone pushes. The downfall and bankruptcy of the 33 families were almost inevitable. Angela came to see me, but the security stopped her. From a distance, she yelled, asking me, "Evan, give me a reason." Why? Did I ever offend you? I looked at her, then at my own hands. "Angela, we deserve to go to hell." She shook her head, seemingly not understanding what I meant. Later, I heard that after Angela's family went bankrupt, the original residents of the West Side, who were violently displaced by Martin, came for justice. Many rushed into their villa, taking away valuables. Angela and her mom hid in a corner, trembling. The conflict grew intense, and somehow, a fire broke out, burning the villa down from top to bottom. The maids of the 33 families all fled, leaving no one to care for these two fallen bosses. In the end, it was Angela's mom who dragged her out of the villa. Although they survived, Angela inhaled a lot of high-temperature gases and smoke during the fire, leading to severe brain damage. She was left in a semi-conscious state. Maybe she'll recover soon. Maybe she'll depend on a breathing machine for life, becoming a vegetal. During Angela's downfall, my dad kept calling me. Evan, your wings are grown, huh? I can't control you anymore. Do you know what you're doing? How many projects did you and Angela's family have together? Do you understand how much economic loss you've caused? Wasn't Angela your childhood playmate? You're ruthless. I answered the first few calls, but later, I got tired of it and stopped bothering. Often, I drove alone at night, aimlessly cruising down the highway. Sometimes, it seemed like Nancy was sitting there in the passenger seat beside me. She'd buckle her seatbelt, sitting there quietly. Evan, she softly called my name. Don't you like Angela? I don't like her. She dragged out the word, suddenly glaring at me. Then who do you like? Do you like me? I smiled, about to answer her. But then Nancy shook her head. No, you can't like me. If you liked me, how could you leave me alone in that place? Yeah, I thought of the inferno in the basement. Consuming regret began to swallow me whole. Nancy, I'm coming to find you. Nancy tilted her head, I got off the highway, driving toward that desolate beach in the dark night. I passed quiet fields and ancient villages. Nancy clutched the seatbelt, whispering, This is the ocean you sank into. I slammed the gas pedal, the car rushed toward the depths of the sea. Then I plunged into the blue abyss. I unbuckled my seatbelt, embracing the imaginary Nancy, squeezing her against me. I'm here to see you, hoping you'll forgive me.